What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's my Game Week 11 preview, so I'm going to go through a couple of the lineups from the Champions League last night and talk through what that means for FPL moving forward. Then I'm going to answer a bunch of your questions. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Let's get into it. So let's start with Man City in the Champions League last night, their lineup and all that kind of stuff and what it means for FPL moving forward. Now, they lost 4-1 to Sporting. I watched that game last night. I would say the 4-1 scoreline flattered Sporting a little bit, but I don't think their win was lucky or anything like that. I say that it flattered them a bit because in the first half, City did create a few chances and Haaland took a penalty in the second half and missed it. So the scoreline could have been closer, but I think Sporting probably did deserve to win. I think once they got going, especially in the second half, it was just far too easy to play through Man City, their midfield and their defence. It's worth saying that the centre-back partnership for City was Akanji and Simpson-Pusey. I'm reliably informed from the commentators in his last game that's how you pronounce it. That's what I'm going to go with. Obviously, they're missing like Diaz and Stones and players like that. But it still was a decent enough side last night. Like Rico Lewis, Akanji and Vardio often feature in the back four. Kovacic has played quite a bit. They're missing Rodri, we know that. Foden and Silva were the kind of two more advanced midfielders. Savinho and Nunez were the wingers. It's obviously not a full-strength City team, but it's also not, apart from one of the centre-backs, it's not completely out of the ordinary, the kind of team they would put together moving forward. So I think defensively it is just a worry right now. Gyökeres, who I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly, I do apologise, had also had a great chance before Sporting got their first goal, and that was a mistake from Rico Lewis. He lost the ball near the halfway line, and then basically it was a one-on-one. It should have been a goal, right? It was a terrible finish. But overall, City defence just looks really poor at the moment. They aren't going to keep many clean sheets. The next three fixtures are not great. Brighton away, Spurs at home, Liverpool away. I think if you've got City defenders, you might want to keep hold of them. But I don't think anyone should be bringing them in necessarily right now. I think for Vardy, I would wait till game week 14. I'm not even sure Rico Lewis is going to start. You look at the next three Premier League games they've got, it's Brighton away, Spurs at home and Liverpool away. So straight away, if Rico Lewis is going to play as a right back, he's up against Mitoma, Son, and then Diaz or Gakpo. I think Pep is just going to favour Walker in at least two, maybe all three of those games. And Kyle Walker, by the way, has not played that great either in the minutes that he's had for Man City. And I don't think he's the same defender he once was. But I think Pep will trust him more than Rico Lewis, especially after that mistake last night. So I'm not convinced Rico Lewis will play the next year. I think the next time I would want to play him in my team is probably Forest at home in 14, and who knows where he's going to be playing at that point. In terms of Haaland, it was another blank. He didn't have a huge amount of chances that I can remember. Obviously did miss a penalty, so it was almost close to one goal. I don't know. Half an hour, 40 minutes in the first half, they were kind of okay. Second half, it's like they just collapsed. And one thing I was saying, maybe I'm just creating a narrative here, but I was watching City at 3 or 4-1 down, and don't get me wrong, they don't find themselves in that position very often. I was watching them thinking they were just quite negative. It's like they just didn't have anything more to give. And I guess at that point, you are kind of pretty negative, right? You're losing 3-4-1, and there probably is no way back. But it's just not what you've come to expect from Man City. And I think they are just in a bit of a rut right now. And it's hard to see how they're going to get out of it. One thing that might happen is Kevin De Bruyne is back. He played about 10 minutes last night at the end of the game. If they can get him back in the team more regularly, that will be more chances for Haaland. The only problem is, and maybe it's easier for, and maybe I'm saying this because I don't have Haaland now, but can Kevin De Bruyne stay fit? Especially with midweek games as well. How many minutes is he going to play? I think these are all concerns, like moving forward. He's only played 4 matches so far, and he played pretty much 90 minutes in all of them. But we saw last season he picked up an injury. It did take him a while to get back into the flow of things. It's taken quite a while to come back this time as well. He's been in training, I think, for a few weeks now. I don't know. Something's just not quite right at Man City. And I don't think that means you've got to take out Haaland. We discussed this yesterday. I think you can absolutely keep him. He will get chances. But defensively, they're just so poor. They're just not the Man City team that you fear right now. And that can quickly change, by the way. There's been periods over the last couple of seasons, where people have said, are Man City better without Haaland and all this kind of stuff. But right now, forgetting about Haaland, there's just something not quite right. If you've got Foden, he'll probably start against Brighton. You could absolutely keep him. But long term, I think there's better ways to use those slots in midfield. I wouldn't buy Vardio until at least game week 14. And if you've got Rico Lewis, just don't expect too many starts. So I want to quickly talk about the Liverpool lineup from last night. I didn't watch that game because, as I said, I was watching the Man City game instead, which, by the way, I only chose to watch because Ruben Amorim was managing his last home game for Sporting before he comes the new Man United manager. But for whatever reason I watched it, I'm glad that I did. In terms of the stats from the Liverpool game, they absolutely cruised this game against Leverkusen. They put up 3.9 XG, which is amazing, and they only conceded 0.8 XG. So the attack was great, and so was the defence. And I think in general, Liverpool's defensive numbers in the Premier League and Champions League this season have been very good. I wouldn't necessarily say they're quite up to the standards of Arsenal from last season, but they really are not far off. So even though they've got some more difficult fixtures coming up over the next 5-6 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised if we see some clean sheets along the way. Whether Trent is worth 7 million, it doesn't look like it at the moment because you can get Konate and Van Dijk, who are also nailed on for less money, and we've only seen 1 assist from Trent so far, but the numbers aren't completely terrible. He is in a more withdrawn role under Slot than he was under Klopp, but hopefully in some of the easier fixtures he'll be given a bit more licence to go forward. So if you've got Trent, I think there's every reason to look to keep him for the next couple. If you haven't got him, maybe it is just worth going for one of Van Dijk or Konate instead and save yourself some money. Tsimikas started the second game in a row for Liverpool. Now, for Robertson owners, that basically tells me he's not an option long term. There's just too much concern now with Tsimikas. He's going to get too many minutes to warrant paying that price for Robertson. But in the very short term, i.e. game week 11, I think there's a good chance that Robertson starts. I think it's very unlikely that Tsimikas would start 3 games in a row. So if you've got Robertson in your team and you're looking at the rest of the squad thinking, I want to make a different transfer, I don't really want to take a hit, which is absolutely fair, I think Robertson will start against Aston Villa. I'm not sure I'm at the point to say that Tsimikas is now first choice, but I do think that long term there is a possibility that could be the case. Robertson will still get a lot of minutes though. So for me, I think Robertson and Tsimikas, in terms of buying them, they can probably both be ignored because when they don't start, they often come on. They're not 90 or 0 minute players. They're like 70, 80, 10 or 20, and that's just annoying for FPL. So I'd probably just ignore both of them in terms of buying, even though Tsimikas is such a nice price. If Robertson was to get injured, different conversation. In terms of the front three, Salah started again. I think what's interesting is Diaz was central and Gakpo was on the left and Nunez missed out. Now, for anyone that went for Nunez as a punt last week, I still think he'll start against Villa. And there is a chance that if Jota's still out after the international break, he'll start against Southampton. But for anyone considering bringing Nunez in still, again, this would probably put me off. For most of the season, we've seen, at least from the start, not necessarily during games, but from the start in the first 11, it's been Jota or Nunez as the 9, Gakpo or Diaz as left winger. The fact that he's happy to play Diaz central would worry me, even though Jota's got an injury for Nunez. So I wouldn't buy him, but if I had him, I'd keep him. I think for me, this basically just reaffirms what I've said for a long time now. Pretty much the whole season. I know I've missed a lot of points at certain stages, but ultimately I'm just going to ignore Liverpool attackers that aren't Salah unless there's key injuries. And obviously I'm not wishing injuries on any player, but if Diaz was to get injured, Gakpo suddenly becomes an option. If Gakpo was to get injured, Diaz is then a much better option for me because their minutes will go up quite a lot. Right now, there's just no guarantee they'll start any given game. And if they don't, a bit like Tsimikas and Robertson, they'll come on. So really good performance by the looks of things. Maybe there's something that watching the game will tell you that the stats don't. But the stats tell me Liverpool were excellent like they have been all season. The attack is absolutely cooking, right? That's what the kids would say, right? I can't get away with that, can I? The attack was cooking. I'm too old for that. And defensively, I think the numbers they've put up continue to be great. And the clean sheets are coming. All right, let's get into some of your questions. So what do you think about captaincy this week? Go rogue with Spurs players or stick with premiums like Salah or Haaland? I think when you've got a game like Ipswich at home, there should always be some consideration for captaincy because there is almost certainly going to be a bunch of goals in that game. And it helps that Spurs are such a good attacking team. So far this season, they've put up the most non-penalty expected goals out of all teams. So they're doing really well, especially at home. And I saw this graphic from Rob on Twitter. His handle is RobT FPL. And this is the bookies' projections for goals and clean sheets. So for Spurs, they're projected to score 2.9 goals. That compares to 2.45 for Man United, 2.35 for Liverpool. And then for Man City, it's just over 2. So Man City's number is still pretty good considering they're away to Brighton. But as you might imagine, Spurs probably going to score the most goals, or at least that's what's most likely. But that doesn't necessarily mean that their players are the best option for captaincy. So for example, in my team, I've got Solanke and Salah. Solanke could do really well. We saw that against Aston Villa last week. He racked up good XG numbers against Brentford and Man United as well. But he's not necessarily on penalties. And his goal threat is very good. But Salah's goal threat is also very good. And he's on penalties. And he's very creative as well. So although I see Liverpool probably scoring fewer goals than Spurs, I don't necessarily see Solanke outscoring Salah. So if it's a choice between the two, I'm still going to go for Salah. And I still think I would go for Haaland over someone like Solanke as well. It might be that Solanke's on penalties, by the way, but I think it's more likely to be Son. And I suspect that Son will start this game. Now, Son is definitely someone that I would consider for captaincy. He's a midfielder like Salah, so you got the extra point for the goal. I suspect that he's on penalties as well. But getting 55 minutes last week, that would probably put me off a little bit. Because he is just coming back from a hamstring issue. And over Spurs' last games, he's played about 124 minutes. Now, Carabao Cup, fair enough, you rest him in Europe as well. But that game was against Man City in the Carabao Cup. If Son was fit enough, I think he would have played at least some part. So I don't know if I would have the confidence in Son. I think Solanke could do really well, but would I put him ahead of Haaland or Salah? I'm not so sure. And then someone like Brennan Johnson could definitely be considered, but he's definitely not going to be on penalties. Or almost certainly not. His minutes are very good, but his goal threat is no higher than the likes of Salah or Haaland. And I think Spurs could, basically, I think Spurs could win 5-0, and Man City and Liverpool might win 2 or 3-0. And I still think that Salah or Haaland could score more FPL points, which is obviously what it all comes down to. I wouldn't completely write off players like Bruno Fernandes either. I know he's been a bit of a joke in terms of returns, but his numbers continue to be really good. And also, he's getting quite a few shots off as well as creating chances. And Leicester at home is a good fixture. I don't think I can talk many people into that. I get that. And most of you don't own him. But I think he's part of the conversation as well. So I would probably have Salah as the best option, then Haaland. Then I would look at my Spurs players. But if someone said to me, I just want to go for Spurs because it's Ipswich at home and there's a high chance that, there's a chance that the upside could be massive, I think that's absolutely fair enough. And if Son was to play in Europe midweek and then get a knock and likely be out for the weekend, that would make Solanke a lot better because he'd almost certainly be next in line for penalties. I don't know. I find it really difficult to go against premiums even in these fixtures. If Son had just played like 90 minutes in a row and was likely to do the same against Ipswich, then maybe you would put him at the top. But I think with everything we know right now, I find it hard to kind of get behind that. I do think the fact that Richarlison picked up an injury in the last game is good for Son's minutes. And Werner is obviously not great. So Son might go and play like 80 plus against Ipswich, but it depends how confident you are in his fitness. But Solanke or Johnson ahead of Haaland or Salah, I'm not sure I'm there. So nice and simple, is it worth keeping Arsenal defence? I think if you've come this far with Arsenal defenders in your FPL team, Game Week 11 would be a weird time to decide I've had enough. Because yes, it's Chelsea away, and if Palmer is fully fit, it's going to be difficult for a clean sheet. But you're only one game week away from the fixtures getting pretty good again. I think it's perfectly fine if you don't want to buy Arsenal defenders this week. In fact, I wouldn't recommend it. And if you get to Game Week 12 and you want to give them a few more weeks before you're comfortable bringing them back in, again, fair enough. But if you've already got them, I can't see how they're worth a transfer out. I mean, just a reminder, from 12 to 18... the fixtures are Forest at home, West Ham away, Man United at home, Fulham away, Everton at home, Palace away, Ipswich at home. A lot of those fixtures, Arsenal are fully capable of getting clean sheets. And don't forget that Raya can get you saved, the defenders can get you attacking returns as well. So I think it would be an odd time to come off. In terms of their ability to get clean sheets moving forward, I think the underlying numbers have been excellent. So they've played 10 games. In 6 of those, they've kept the opposition to 0.74 XG or less. So it was 0.47 against Wolves in Game Week 1. 0.74 was the highest out of those 6 games against Spurs away. 0.32 against Leicester. 0.65 against Southampton. 0.39 against Liverpool at home. And 0.53 against Newcastle away. They are very encouraging numbers. So that's 6 out of the 10 games. In terms of the other 4, the Aston Villa away game in Game Week 2 was only 1.28. Not bad, right? Villa are a good attacking team. And the other 3 games were not great at all. But all 3 of those games, they were down to 10 men for a period of the match. So Brighton at home, 10 men, 1.83 XG. Man City away, which is tough to get a clean sheet anyway, 2.16, down to 10 men for basically the whole second half. And then Bournemouth away, just gone, another red card, 1.82. So overall, the Arsenal defensive numbers have been excellent. The clean sheets have not, but that can swing at any time. And also, Odegaard is back in the squad apparently for their Champions League game tonight. And I think that will help, because I think their press from the front will be better with Odegaard in it. The only slight concern, and I've just said all those positives, is apparently Declan Rice is not in the squad and he's picked up a knock. Now, hopefully he'll be back for Chelsea, and then obviously moving forward he'll play a big part in that team. But if he was to be out for a while, then I'd worry a little bit more about the Arsenal defence. But I just think the way they set up, you know, Gabriel Saliba, the press from the front, etc., when Odegaard is back, I think clean sheets are coming. And I don't have strong opinions about a lot of things in FPL. I think there are just genuinely quite a few close decisions, and sometimes it can swing either way. I'm very confident that Arsenal will do well over those fixtures I just mentioned. And by the way, if you get past the Ipswich at home game in 18, it does get a bit tougher. Brentford away, Brighton away, Spurs at home. But after that, there's a few more good fixtures. Like Arsenal have basically played a lot of the top teams already. Like they've already had to play Villa, Brighton, Spurs, City, Liverpool and Newcastle. Like I was watching the FPL yesterday. I think Praz mentioned it. The hardest fixtures after Chelsea away for Arsenal. Like overall, I'm not saying that all of these are easy for clean sheets, but are probably Man City at home in 24. And when do they play Liverpool? Liverpool away in game week 36. Like, don't get me wrong, Spurs at home in 21 is not going to be easy for a clean sheet. Even like Brighton away, Brentford away, etc. But there's no really terrible run of fixtures, and we've seen how consistent Arsenal defence can be in previous seasons. There's no reason with the numbers they've got so far that can't be true again. So how bullish are you on Man United? I already have De Ligt, and the next 3 before Arsenal seem like an opportunity to double up and get Bruno or Garnacho in for a short run before shipping to Saka. Now, I'm probably a little bit more bullish on Man United after watching Sporting last night. But if I'm being realistic, Sporting is a completely different team to Man United. Man United have got their own problems. There's a lot to fix. Amorim is not going to come in and get that right straight away. Could Man United do really well over the next 3 fixtures? Yes. But I would have thought that even if Ten Hag was in charge, because Leicester at home, Ipswich away and Everton at home are just good games on paper. So I've got a little bit of, it's probably more hope than confidence. But there's definitely something there to say that Man United will improve. But the idea that they're going to go from where they are now to suddenly being a top team again, it just ain't going to happen, right? Does that mean you should ignore them for FPL? No, not necessarily, because like I said, the fixtures are good. But I do question whether it's worth bringing them in just for this short run if you're just going to get rid of them straight away. Like take Bruno, for example. I'm happy to have him as a massive differential over the next 3 games. But if I know for sure that I'm going to move him to Saka, it's probably just worth saving the transfer and not getting Bruno in the meantime. Because although Saka's got Chelsea away this week, straight afterwards it's Forest at home and West Ham away. So if it's Saka for Chelsea away, Forest at home, West Ham away, versus Bruno with Leicester at home, Ipswich away, Everton at home, is there enough of a difference between those 2 players to warrant the extra transfer? Probably not. And as I've just mentioned, Arsenal's fixtures are great for a very long time, and probably even better for an attacker than they are for a defender, because once you come up against Brighton away, Spurs at home, Villa at home, you're probably not expecting clean sheets, but you are expecting returns from Saka. So I'm like I said, I'm very happy to have Bruno as a huge differential, and I think for me, I don't feel in a rush to have to get Saka. Like if I get to game week 12 and there's another issue in my team and I don't have the transfers to get Saka in, I'll just keep Bruno for Ipswich away. It's fine, right? Same in 13 when he's got Everton at home. But I think if I was buying new, I'd probably just go straight to Saka. And Garnacho I've spoken about kind of this week and last week. I think he probably is Man United's second best attacker behind Bruno and probably their best winger right now. And he's been absolutely nailed in recent weeks. That might not continue. You just don't know how Amorim is going to set up. And even if Garnacho is in the team, what kind of role is he going to play? Is he going to still play 90 minutes every game? Or would he start getting subbed early? I think if you've got the money, you just go to Brennan Johnson instead. So I'm a little bit bullish on Man United, but we've been here before, so I'm reining myself back in. I think they could just be good options because of the fixtures, but it is just a short run because after that Everton game, it is Arsenal away and City away in 14 and 16, which is not great. I will say this about Bruno Fernandes, and this is not a massive knee-jerk based on the penalty. If you've watched me for a while, you know that most of the time I don't change my opinions that quickly. But in the back of my mind, as an owner of Bruno already, I kind of see him as happy to sell for Saka, but if I get stuck, I'm also more than happy to keep hold of him because there are extra games over December. And the one thing with Bruno is he won't get injured, or at least almost never does, and he always plays 90 minutes. And I don't think that will change under a new manager. Like, he might play in a slightly different position, but he'll be on that pitch. And I think that is quite a good thing for FPL. Like, we're going to have, I'm telling you now, game week 14, I'm going to get a ton of questions about, is this player going to start? How many minutes will they get? There'll be no questions about Bruno Fernandes. He'll then play 15 and 16 and 17 and 18 and 19. And that's quite handy, especially when he costs like just over 8 million and he's on penalties as well. So short term, I just get Saka. But if it's potential to bring in Bruno and maybe hold him longer term if things go wrong, I'm kind of okay with that because I think he offers a lot and you don't have to worry about whether he's going to start or get injured or anything like that. So I'm bullish on Man United in general. For FPL, less so because I just think in most cases it's probably just not worth the extra transfer. So Chris Wood is in form and has been great, but the fixtures are getting worse. If you have value tied up in him, is it worth keeping or selling? I spoke about Chris Wood yesterday, although that was more from the angle about whether or not you should bring him in if you're a non-owner. This is about selling. And some of you would have got him at 6 million. He's gone up to 6.5. I'll say this about Chris Wood. If I had him in my team right now, that is an unbelievably easy hold. And I would be giving it about 5 seconds thought about whether to sell him this week. It's Newcastle at home. It's not an easy fixture, but it ain't bad either. That's it. You're just holding him and then reassessing in game week 12. I think for a lot of people in 12, if you are worried about a lack of returns and Arsenal getting a clean sheet, well, most of you probably have someone like Morgan Rogers who's got Crystal Palace at home. If you've got like Semenyo instead, which is very popular at the moment, he's got Brighton at home. So you can just play him instead. Play either of them instead of Chris Wood if you wanted to. And then you've got Ipswich at home in 13. And keep in mind that a lot of us that don't own him probably won't bring him in. And that's a good thing if you're an owner. You get to keep that guy that scored however many ridiculous goals it is this season. 8, I think. Yeah, 8 in 10 matches. So I think I would just hold him. The Arsenal game is not great. But I think for a lot of people, if you've got an 8th attacker, you could play them instead. And then you're just reassessing from game week 14 onwards. You might look at it again after Ipswich and think, well, Man City away, Man United looking better under Amorim, etc. Just reassess it as you go. But for the next kind of 3 games, I think he's just such an easy keep. And also, it's worth saying about the cheap forwards, and I've said this like over the last week or so, right now it looks like there's a ton of great options, but that can change so quickly. Like, you look what's just happened in game week 10, right? Jimenez, very popular, he's blanked. All of a sudden, you'd probably keep hold of Jimenez, but would you bring him in? You probably wouldn't be so keen, right? Most people not looking to bring in Vardy. Evanilson I'm going to talk about later, but I don't think he's going to be that popular. Cunha has got Southampton at home this week. Could be great. But if you get past the Southampton at home game as a non-owner and he doesn't absolutely smash it, you're going to look at 3 away games in the 4 afterwards and think I probably don't need to rush to Cunha. So things can change quickly. It looks like there's a ton of cheap forwards right now, but I'm not sure any of them warrant selling Chris Wood. Even Visser's just blanked as well. Plays 71 minutes against Fulham. Like, he's not immune from early subs, and he's not going to return every single game. So, yeah, if I've got Chris Wood, I'm just loving life right now and just keeping him. It's so easy. So as I've just mentioned Evanilson, let's talk about him next. Is Evanilson being overlooked? He's only 5.9 million. Great fixtures coming up. Returned in the last couple of games, and the data is very good. Is he being overlooked? Yes. I think most of the time when people talk about cheap forwards, Evanilson's name is never that high up the list. Are people right to overlook him? I would also say yes, probably. I don't think he's someone I'd look to bring in. And the reason is, it's great that he scored 2 goals over the last 2 game weeks, but that goal against Villa in game week 9 was off the bench. He didn't even start. And that would worry me a little bit going forward. Now, he has started 9 out of 10 games so far, so it's not like he's massively prone to being benched, but it shows it's possible. And again, just to kind of confirm, we have got midweek game weeks coming up in game week 14. So that's going to be a risk for minutes around that period. And then over Christmas, you got deadlines on the 21st, 26th, and 29th of December. And then another one on the 4th of January. So is he going to play all those games? I would say probably not. And even when he does start, he always gets subbed early. He hasn't played 90 minutes in any game. And Bournemouth have got quite a few attackers. So I think it's right to look at Bournemouth players because their attack is very good. But I think for me, it's probably Semenyo or no one else. I just don't think that I would go for Evanilson. Like 5.9 is a great price, but Brighton's fixtures from 12 onwards get good. Welbeck's 5.9, João Pedro's 5.4. Raul Jimenez is cheaper. And look, Raul Jimenez is not immune from early substitutions either. He just came off in the 72nd minute. But his starts since he got in the team in game week 4 have been pretty good. For what it's worth, I don't think it would be impossible for Menez to start at some point over the end of November and December, right? Jimenez is definitely not absolutely mega nailed or anything like that. But I think he probably is right now more nailed in that Fulham team than Evanilson is in the Bournemouth one. In terms of the data, I'll just check it here. As always, if you want to check out all the data for any player and all the other tools that Fantasy Football have, Fantasy Football Hub have, link in the description below, 7-day free trial, 30% off. I should know how to say that by now. Evanilson, he's on 0.31 non-penalty expected goals per 90, 0.09 expected assists. That really is nothing to write home about, especially when you put into context that he doesn't always play 90 minutes. I really like looking at per 90 stats to kind of level the playing field, but then you have to add context about how many minutes a player actually gets. For example, if you go to Raul Jimenez, he's at 0.41. So he's getting more minutes most of the time, and his goal threat is higher. Like Bournemouth probably do have slightly better fixtures overall in the short term. I can't see me looking at Evanilson at any time soon. So he's being overlooked, yes, and probably rightly so in my opinion. So is Pedro Porro the best 5.5 million defender for the next 4 weeks? If we're not talking about potential value and where you could use money elsewhere, and we're simply saying I've got 5.5 to spend, I need one defender, any other factors don't come into the equation, I think he probably is because of the fixtures that they've got. Now, obviously, in game week 12, it's City away. So you can probably write that off as no returns whatsoever. But I think Ipswich at home in 11 and Fulham at home in 13 are pretty good. Like, Fulham won't be an easy game, but you wouldn't mind playing Porro in that match. And then Bournemouth away in 14 is going to be difficult for a clean sheet. But you've got the potential for attacking returns. Now, I've said before this season that Porro's attacking numbers are down on previous seasons, but they're not terrible. And the fewer minutes that Maddison gets, the more set pieces Porro will take as well. So there is still potential for attacking returns, maybe less so for clean sheets, but it wouldn't be completely impossible for Spurs to get a clean sheet this week and in game week 13 against Fulham. It is a bit worrying their centre-back situation though. Van der Ven is out until after the international break, and apparently Romero is going to be out for 10 days as well. So both their centre-backs are going to be missing against Ipswich. So it might not be a complete shock if Ipswich were to score, and then it's about how quickly Van der Ven can get fit after the international break. So Porro is not perfect by any stretch, but how many defenders under his price are? Like, it doesn't feel like there's that many. Like, some of us are relying on like Trent and Gabriel to start getting returns soon. But in terms of cheaper defenders, I wouldn't say there's an obvious other player to go for that's going to guarantee you more points. Like, some people might be looking at Man United defenders at the moment, which I think is absolutely fine. And if Dalot keeps his place under Amorim, he's not a bad option. And the next 3 fixtures are decent. And then you've got home games against Forest in 15, Bournemouth in 17, Wolves away in 18, etc. Maybe he's worth the 0.4 million saving. But Dalot doesn't guarantee you returns any more than Porro does. And it's the same with Aït-Nouri, by the way. I think he's still a really nice option at 4.7 million. I love the fact that he's got Southampton at home. The Wolves' defence is terrible. It's not going to keep many clean sheets. It's going to be difficult against Fulham away, Bournemouth at home, Everton away, and even West Ham away as well. So you are kind of relying on attacking returns there too. So I really don't mind Porro over the next 4, to the point that at one stage this week, I even considered bringing him in for a hit for Rico Lewis, because I just don't think he's going to do much over the next few weeks. I'm not someone that likes to take hits unless I have to, so I probably won't do it, and I'll talk about it a bit more in team selection tomorrow. But I think Porro's still a little bit undervalued. I don't think he's a dead cert for points. And I think a lot of people will consider selling him in 12. I don't think that's necessarily a bad move either. But like Bruno, he offers you 90 minutes every single week. That's quite nice over December. He could go and get you an attack and return along the way. And who knows, Spurs might keep the odd clean sheet, although that's quite unlikely. So I think so far, he hasn't warranted the 5.5. But I wouldn't lose all hope given the next 4 fixtures they've got. I'm going to look at the predicted points on Hub. Again, another tool. I'm not going to go for all that again. Links in the description below. 5.5 or below over the next 4 weeks. So 11, 12, 13, 14. They've got Aït-Nouri at the top and Timber and Walker and then Porro. Walker you just can't go for. The minutes are not guaranteed. Although I do think he'll start the next 3. But I just don't see clean sheets there. There's no way that I would go for Walker over Porro. Timber maybe. Especially if Calafiori remains out for a little while, because I think his minutes will be pretty good. That's actually not a bad shout. The problem is, no matter how many times Timber plays, at what point are you going to be confident that he starts every single game? That'd be my only concern. You just don't have that with Porro. And then Aït-Nouri, fair enough. Is he that much more attacking than Porro? And is Wolves' defence that much better than Spurs? I'm not sure. But I guess Porro does have to play Man City away. I'm a little bit surprised that Porro's only 4th there, but what do I know anyway? So yeah, I like him. I think he probably is the best defender, 5.5 below. Is he worth that money? That is debatable. So our Newcastle players like Lewis Hall, Anthony Gordon and Alexander Isak back on the menu with their fixture run. So I spoke about Isak yesterday on the Transfer Tips video, so I won't go back into that in full. But the short version is, if you've got 8.3 million to spend on a forward slot and spending that money doesn't impact your future transfers, I really like Isak as a massive differential going forward. So he's a good option. I think with Anthony Gordon, I'm less sure about where he fits in right now. And it's not to say that he's a bad pick, because he's not. At 7.2 million, you've got a player that when fit starts every single game. Attacking numbers are pretty good. Great cross for Isak in the last match. But it's about which midfielder you give up to put him in. So my midfield right now is Fernandes, Salah, Palmer, and Mbeumo, Rodgers. Would I prefer Gordon to Rodgers? Absolutely. But there's a 2 million price difference. I just don't have that kind of money to be throwing around on an upgrade for a very, very valuable player in Rodgers. So therefore, Gordon has to basically oust one of the other 4 midfielders. And he's not better than Palmer or Salah or even Bruno in the short term. And Mbeumo is just incredible value. So I don't think Gordon really fits in with most people's squads. And that's why I'd probably ignore him. Not because he's a bad pick. I just think there's better midfielders to choose from. And even if I end up selling Bruno, it'll almost certainly be for Saka. And I think if you're someone that's not on Haaland right now, I think the midfield almost picks itself. Like in 12, 13, 14, like game weeks 12, 13, 14, if things go to plan, those that have sold Haaland, I think this is the midfield 5 the majority of people will be looking to go for. Anthony Gordon just doesn't fit in. If you've kept Haaland, then maybe it's a slightly different conversation, because at that point, your structure probably looks a bit more... or your structure probably has a midfielder around like 6 to 7 million, like a Brennan Johnson, a Garnacho, or someone like that. And at that stage, it's not that much more money to go from one of them to Gordon. So maybe for Haaland owners, he's worth more of a consideration. But there's no way I'd put him in right now ahead of Mbeumo. So Gordon is going to do well over the next few weeks. But I'm not sure there's a rush to get him with how most people's midfielders are set up. And then Lewis Hall, I quite like him. 4.3 million. He started the last 5 games. Will that continue? I guess it's hard to know for sure. Like, you're never, at least not for another kind of 15, 20 games. It's going to be hard to say that Lewis Hall is as nailed as like a Van Dijk, right? Or even like a Fabian Schär in the Newcastle team. But things are looking pretty good right now. There's not much competition there. Dan Burns playing centre-back. Not sure when Botman is due to return. Let me have a look here. Expected back 30th of December, but he's been out for so long. They're going to have to integrate him slowly. And then Kelly for left back just hasn't been getting many minutes. So Lewis Hall looks like really good value. And I think there is a few fixtures where you'd play him over the next few weeks. Like if I had to play him against Forest away, okay, I expect Chris Wood to score, but it wouldn't be completely terrible. West Ham at home is fine. Palace away, if Eze's not back, is not completely awful either. Leicester at home, good. Ipswich away, good. There's a few fixtures in there, and he does offer a lot of value at that price point. So I'm not against bringing Lewis Hall in. So him and Isak are quite like. Gordon, I think, is a good pick in isolation, but not when you put into context other midfielders that you could go for instead. If you enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button as well. Rate 5 stars if you listen on podcast. Check out Fantasy Football Hub using the link in the description below. Otherwise, I'll catch you tomorrow for my team selection video.